Hello. I hope this is working well. Let me just check to make sure. Hope all this is working well for you and that you can hear me and see me okay. I'm trying again on Instagram today because it looked like it was going to work. For some reason, Instagram hasn't worked for a few weeks, but here I am, and it's good to be back. I've not been advertising my lives for the past few weeks. I'm still catching up after the Polyglot conference, so do excuse that. Um, I'm actually I've got a huge to-do list of things that I need to get through, and so yeah, I've just not been able to be as organized as normal to sort of ask questions in advance and do all that kind of stuff. But I have been thinking about what we can talk about, and I hope that you're gonna enjoy so what we talk about today. Let me just get that light back. That was a nice light, and I don't know what happened. My word. Okay, I have this new very posh light. I don't like that color. That's a nice color. There we go. Is that better? Can you see me better with this light? And also, is the sound okay? Hopefully so. Okay, brilliant. So, yeah, this new light is actually quite cool. I think it's a lot easier on my eyes as well than the old one. So today I was actually inspired once again by a conversation I had with oh dear, my friend um, Robin McPherson. We were talking again on Saturday about languages and language learning and levels and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of leads on a little bit from what I've spoken about before. But, I don't know. This keeps going on and off. This is ridiculous. And this conversation that we were having, I may have to go back to my old one. I think it's not going to work. Do excuse me for 1 second while I at least plug this in so I at least have some light. Otherwise, I can see that the lighting is not amazing on YouTube, particularly, but on Instagram it's a bit better. Here we go. Dear me. Okay. I will talk about something language related now instead of just technical problems. There we go. Well, at least something. We're back to the old light that I had, unfortunately. But anyway, here we are. So yeah, I was talking to my friend Robin McPherson again, and we have a catch up every week, pretty much. Have done for the last few months, and I do enjoy his company. He's very nice to talk to, and yeah, we've known each other for many years, and we talk about things to do with languages, and I enjoy those conversations, and they take us in directions sometimes that I don't always expect. And what we were talking about were about words and how many words you need to know to speak a language and the kind of levels that we talk about. So what I find is many people uh, will so many people will sort of have an idea as to when they speak a language. You have a feeling in your head, right? And you speak it at certain levels. So there's definitely, when we talked about the sort of the fake polyglots, or the idea of thinking you know more than you know, this, and the idea of sort of imposter syndrome as being the opposite effect of this Dunning-Kruger effect of, not knowing as much as you think you know, because you don't know what you don't know. Now, the sort of what we can talk about then from that is, in terms of numbers of words that you would expect to know at certain levels. Now, I mean, I very often hear people talking about, around 6,000 words, and you're pretty much able to do most things around that, is sort of what I hear bandied about. And I don't think that's a bad number, actually. 6,000 is it's a lot. It's a lot of words to learn, but it's not a bad number of words to learn. But other people sort of, when I've asked the question in the past, have talked about, tens of thousands, 30,000, whatever. I mean, you may or may not have an active ability in over 30,000 words in the one language you speak if you're monolingual. So just to sort of bring things down into a bit more realistic context, um, I mean, with 6,000 words, pretty much you're going to see most of the things. Unless you've learned very obscure 6,000 words, sort of just about plants and flowers. Excuse my thumbs and fingers. I've been peeling pomegranates and I had a pomegranate smoothie. So yeah, excuse my thumb and fingers. They're still from sort of pomegranate juice, still a bit yellow. Um, but yeah, when we talk about these sort of numbers of words, and if you're not learning strange words, just learning pretty general words that you would see, there may be some weird ones in there. And we talked about last week the gold bricks for the Lego, so they would be kind of specialist type vocabulary or very specific idioms or turns of phrase or things that people wouldn't expect you to say at a certain level, particularly if you learned more advanced vocabulary when you're just starting out in the language and it sort of shines through. There's this sort of gold brick that I talked about last week. Uh, all of that aside, just sort of generally speaking, 6,000 words is pretty good to be able to do most things. I think it's a pretty solid number of words to know. Now, I have heard people talk in the past about I speak this language at C1 or I speak this language at B2 even or even C1, C2, B1, and then they won't know a word that's quite you would expect them to know, like the word for a spoon or the word for I don't know a shoe or something like that. That would be quite a basic word. Now, just to give you an idea, the words spoon and shoe are words that you would find at A1 level usually in pretty much any language I've studied. Those words would come under the vocabulary under an A1 level. So to not know them um, is a bit strange when you get past sort of even into B1, B2 levels. It would be a bit odd not to know those words, or at least to not be able to recognize them. But sometimes things happen where we don't know words, right? And this is I think a really good thing. This is one of the things that really hit me when I was speaking to Robin was at A1 and A2, you build up your basic vocabulary, and we're talking around I think about 1,500 or 2,000 words roughly that you would know by the end of A2, which is a fair chunk of vocabulary. It's quite a lot of vocabulary to learn. Um, so to be fair to that level, that's not a small amount of vocabulary, and you can do quite a lot with that vocabulary, and particularly if you're learning it in a language that's close to a language you already speak. So sometimes what can happen when you have an A2 command of a language actively, and you can speak or write at that level without sort of using lots of aids, I'm talking about just sort of naturally. Um, what can happen is, if particularly if a language is similar to the language you speak, you can feel that you actually speak it a lot better than your active command. So it's quite possible that you come across people, or you yourself feel that your ability in a language in terms of understanding, comprehension, passive skills are actually quite a lot higher. And that would be because you have an awful lot um, of vocabulary that you understand, or even grammatical ideas that you understand fairly naturally. There are false friends in vocabulary, and there are false friends sometimes in grammar. And you come across this in grammar um, in uh, in things like between Catalan and Spanish and Italian, where you've got the verb when you say, for example, um, uh, va começar, which sounds like it should be a future thing, but in Catalan it would mean the past. Um, for I started, and so you do get, or vaig fer, I did. It sounds like it should have been I will do, but it doesn't. It means I did. And in the Slavic languages, you get a similar thing with um, all of the Slavic languages except for Bulgarian and Macedonian, where um, the L form for the past tense will actually mean something a little bit different than what other Slavic speakers expect it to mean, including people with speaking South Slavic languages. So there are a number of things like that, and it's quite yeah. It can be you can have this feeling when you speak a language, and then you sort of have these false friends mixed in. So you may be an A2 actively, but you could be more like a B2 passively. And And the thing that happens is that you feel that maybe you describe yourself as this, and then somebody will talk to you, and all of a sudden you'll feel, "Oh no, I've just like fallen flat on my face because I didn't know this word and I didn't understand this expression completely, and I didn't quite get it." And absolutely fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's very interesting when you talk about the numbers of words, because when you talk about counting them, there's this sort of idea of 2,000, and then for the A up to the A2, maybe up to like 1,500, 2,000 for the A2, and then you talk about 6,000 and you speak the language, and maybe you talk about different numbers for other things. It can often be very difficult to calculate and very imprecise. And I always found that when people asked me how many kanji I knew in Chinese, because I just find those conversations really, really challenging to answer because I don't count them. Typically, I honestly don't count them. So, and you don't remember what you don't, you don't remember what you forgot necessarily either. You may have what you've forgotten, you might have just forgotten, and you're not aware that you should know it or have known it, or anything and everything in between. So i- when you get to the number of words and you're talking about active vocabulary and passive vocabulary, I think it's very important to make that distinction and delineation. Um, when you get to a very new language, like for me with Korean, okay, there are a couple of Chinese words that I know and a few Japanese words that I know that have crossed over into Korean. And then obviously the English words as well that have been sort of Koreanified, and I, that's one thing, right? But generally speaking, what I see is completely new to me, and so all of these new words, this sort of vocabulary of 2000 is a big fight to get that vocabulary and to remember it, let alone recognize it, just recognizing it, or even let alone speaking it actively, should I say. So just to recognize it is a struggle, let alone actually using it. And then when you have words that you think you should know in another language, like for example, if you're learning Catalan, and for me, Catalan is not one of my strongest Romance languages. But let's say, for example, if I were to say, okay, well, I understand Catalan to a fairly good level, but you could learn Catalan quite well and possibly just start talking about the news and about politics and different things, and use quite a lot of vocabulary that's shared vocabulary between other languages that you already know, even English to a very large degree, when you're talking about these etherical sort of ideas, these concepts of economics, politics, philosophy. This type of vocabulary in Romance languages and English tends to be very similar. Um, whereas, and you could probably expand your vocabulary by thousands just with that type of knowledge, right? But then you may not know the word olgos, which is the word for a dog in Catalan, because that word might not come up very often for you in the types of things you're reading, the types of things you're listening to on the news, or if it does, your brain might just skip over it and not think about it. And it's natural that you might not know it. Another word that you may understand if you hear it, but you may not know in like a language like Catalan would be llet. Llet is milk in Catalan, but it's not necessarily something you're going to guess. You might get it because it's, sounds similar to, and it's the same origin as le or leche or leici, whichever other language you know, or even lapte in Romanian. It may be a similar word, right? So yet is not a difficult word. Or ungoteliet, in the expression ungoteliet, is like something that's very, very white, something that's very, very white. Es ungoteliet. Is a drop of milk. Like that. You could describe me as ungoteliet in Catalan. But these kinds of things you're not necessarily going to know. And the weird thing is that one would expect with an A1 or an A2 level, that you would definitely know the word for dog, you would definitely know the word for milk, and you would definitely know the word for like spoon or whatever else I mentioned before. These are words that you learn in the very beginning. Now, the really funny thing that I see, or have seen online before now is, well, if you really speak the language, do you know whatever word? And it could be that you don't. And it could be you don't know that word for many, many reasons. It doesn't necessarily destroy all of your linguistic knowledge because you don't know a certain word. You just may not recall it. You may actually have never come across it or never had the need to use it. One of the words I heard asked for a number of times before was shoelaces. It just may not be a word that you came across. It's certainly not a word that you would necessarily see in the A1 and A2 level vocabularies that I've seen. Shoes for sure. You may come across it in B1 B2, but B1 and B2 texts and vocabulary are less easy to predict what is in them, because the text for those levels, generally speaking, in the intermediate levels, is quite random sometimes. It's on many, many topics, and the vocabulary that you learn will be quite different in terms of depending on the text you read with in your class or in your books, will definitely have an influence on what kind of vocabulary you come out of those levels with. And for sure, when you're going through these kind of B levels, when you've got past that 2000 and going to the 4000, 6,000 level of words, the next 4,000 words, those 4,000 words could be anything and everything, right? They could be so many different things, and they could depend on your interest. They could depend on what the teacher likes, depend on what's in the books that you're reading. It could depend on so many things. So the weird thing is, and this is why I think people always talk about this intermediate plateau, is that you've got so many words that you're building up to get to a point where it's really rare for you to come across, in most circumstances, new vocabulary or vocabulary you don't know. Until you get to that point of having sort of covered all of these topic bases with all the vocabulary, until you get to that point where you've done that, you can feel this imposter syndrome. You can feel that you've almost gone back to zero. Like, you have a day, and you have these days where you're just like, oh, how do I not know this? How's that possible? And someone might even be mean enough to say to you, you seriously don't know that word. And and I get it. I get that you can have that feeling. I get that feeling sometimes. And I have to stop myself and say, do you know what? Just because I don't know a word does not mean that the rest of what I know has gone away. Um, so uh, you can see why it becomes very, very difficult to sort of pin levels on languages. Now, absolutely, when I think we're making our own assessments of our own linguistic ability, I think we do need to be conscious of what we're saying to people when we say things. So it would be shocking to me for somebody to say that they've got to a C1 or a C2 level, for example, and to not know the word for milk, or to not know the word for a shoe, to not know the word for a dog, to not know the word for a window. That would be particularly odd. And I think if you don't know those base words and you're claiming a C2 level, it would be odd. If you don't know the word for shoelaces on command, and you've passed the C1 or a C2 exam, I wouldn't be as shocked. I would put that more down to you haven't drilled down into that topic a little bit more. Um, I think it's entirely possible to pass an exam and not know a word like that. But this is where sort of it's very difficult to know where you filter the words and where those boundaries are. And the boundaries are quite strange when it comes to language learning. So, for example, one of the first words I learnt in Swedish was plasthandtag, which means a plastic handle. Now, it's one of the first words I learnt in Swedish. And the reason I learned that word in Swedish was not because I'm very odd or I have a very strange penchant towards learning particular vocabulary to do with doors and handles in specific languages. No, none of that, none of that at all. It was because I studied Swedish in the first year of my university studies in Scandinavian studies. I used the colloquial Swedish book. And I used the colloquial Swedish book because my lecturer at university for Swedish wrote it. And he had a very wacky sense of humor, and he was a lovely, lovely man, and a great teacher. He was a lot of fun. He had lots of what we call now dad jokes, which I thought they were hilarious. And he was, I'd say, a very, very nice man. His name's Philip Holmes, Dr. Philip Holmes, but he always said, either call me Dr. Holmes or Phil. So we called him Phil, and he was very, very nice. So he created this character, Bill, who goes around Sweden and he sells plastic handles. He has a plastic handle factory, and he makes these plastic handles and sells them around Sweden, which is brilliant. I mean, why not? But the word stuck in my head, okay, but that's not a word normally that I would expect you to put together necessarily at an A1 level or an A2 level, which is at the level where I learnt this word. It would be something that maybe that would come in quite a bit later. I mean, a word like a handle, like a door handle, it's quite a specific word, right? And sometimes handles have different words in different languages depending on what type of handle it is. So it's not always particularly easy to dominate or to memorize or master all of the specific vocabulary in a language. It gets quite challenging, in fact, to be able to do that. So when it gets to vocabulary, my advice is to be aware of your background and to then go in with a more measured response to when people ask you your level. It's always wise, I think, to go in with a measured response of, okay, there could be some really weird words, like really basic words that I wouldn't necessarily know, and something that you'd expect me to know, because I know other things that are way more complicated or seen as way more specialized or specific. And so I would definitely say that, there are certain languages where, for me, I know some very, very specific words. And I mean, just to give you an example, I have, hopefully not, maybe not here. I may not have them here on my shelf at the moment. But when I was younger, we had this book of 10,000 words in German, and there was another one in French. And I used to spend time going through making sure I knew as many of those words as possible. This is not something I necessarily advocate as a way of learning vocabulary, and a lot of people hate this sort of idea of learning word lists. But I actually went through a phase in my learning when I was younger where I used to like learning lists of vocabulary and testing myself on them, a bit like you get with the sort of the Memrise apps or the Anki cards or whatever it is you use, where you learn vocabulary and you test yourself and you have it sort of spaced repetition. You could even do it in sentences like on Closemaster or something. And I used to do this, and I'd learn ridiculous words sometimes in languages that I possibly would not get to use. And I remember learning words when I was even at school, and then I used them in France or in Spain or somewhere else, and they'd never even heard of the words, or they were like, "Oh, I've heard it somewhere, but I don't actually know what it means." Um, it very, very much gets to that point where you're sort of, why are you learning it? So if you are learning a language, yes, I agree that sort of this idea of, if you know a couple of thousand words, then you can probably get by in a lot of conversational things for basic stuff. If you know around 6,000, you're probably going to be able to understand quite a lot of things, that even like the news and things like that, you're going to get a lot of that stuff in already, roughly speaking. And but then the more the more you don't know as well. Even in a language like English, that is my first language, and I've been speaking from day one, really. It's There are still languages that there are still words in English that I may not know or may not fully understand, or turns of phrase that I may not have come across. And that's completely natural as well. And likewise, when you learn a language and you go and you speak to people from that country, they're going to have had similar experiences. And so when you use them, it may not know them either. So yeah, they were kind of my thoughts, a little bit, yeah, sort of a little bit unadulterated actually for you to sort of make of as you will. I hope that if you're listening and you sort of find this whole thing of vocabulary and how much there is to learn challenging, that it helps to sort of reassure you that we all go through this. I mean, at the moment, I'm still going through it with a number of languages. I mean, I'm going through this sort of pain barrier with Greek, where sometimes I'll not know a word that I think I should have known, at kind of the A1, A2 level, and I'm doing B level texts in Greek, which sometimes can have some very, very specific vocabulary, and it it sometimes is challenging to sort of not just learn that vocabulary because you're seeing it, but then trying to use it and trying to remember it. It can be tricky. But anyway, I would very happy to answer any other questions you may have at this point. I think I've probably said all I had to say on this bit. So nice to see you, konnichiwa, konnichiwa. Genki desu ka? Okay. Reading is my favorite way to learn new words. Yeah, reading's a good way to do it. I mean, the more exposure you have to languages, the more you get to them. The thing with reading that I found interesting is sometimes that you can read a lot and your passive understanding of the language goes up, but then you sometimes feel you're scratching your head for some of the active knowledge. And so I definitely, if your goal is to speak as well, I mean, obviously, if your goal is just to be a polymath and to read and understand, then carry on with it. It's a fine objective to have. If your goal is to read and also speak, then make sure you do balance it out with speaking opportunities, because it can, and I have met people who have read extensively and then not really done very much with the spoken language, and then felt almost frustrated with not being able to get it out. And in fact, I mean, I've been in classes with people like that, and I've met them in various places as well. So if your goal is to speak and read and understand, then please do remember to train your active skills too. Okay. I got fluent. Thank you for the motivation. Now I'm slowly working on Russian. Love your channel. Helps me a lot because you're great. Thank you very much, Loves Languages. I appreciate it. Thank you. Even if I memorize words in Russian, it changes so much in the sentence that, yeah, realizing it becomes hard, very hard, and making it study very slow. Yeah, so with a language like Russian, where you have grammatical cases and endings and the words change quite drastically, it can be, it can definitely slow up the uptake of new vocabulary, because you have to get used to seeing words in different forms, and it is normal and natural that you would find that over time. And that is definitely a language where reading a lot or listening to and listening to the language a lot helps to get to hear more and more of the way the language uses the words in different positions in the sentence, in different for different reasons. So I definitely recommend a lot of input with a language like Russian, particularly if you don't speak another Slavic language. Okay, everyone. Wow, this week went fast. Yeah, here we are again. Yeah, I know. The week went really, 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 really quickly for me too. Language therapy. I love that you describe it as that. Thank you. Hi, Richard, how's it going? Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, Rasmus. How are you? Doing well? I actually forgot the word for spoon in Spanish, but I feel like if I saw it, I'd remember it. Cuchara. Cuchara is spoon in Spanish. I feel like it's such a long time since I got to use the word. Yeah, it's a funny. Some of these words are quite funny. Cuchara it's a funny word. But yeah, some of them tend to be quite different in some languages. These words that obviously would be normally quite simple, right? Değerli için kod faydalı paylaşmalarını ve önerilerin için çok teşekkür ederiz. Oh, çok teşekkür ederim. Rica ederim. Çok çok iyi bir Farsça bir şey söyleyebilir mi? Söyleyebildiğini çok merak ediyorum ve çok evet çok mutluyum. Okay. More just out of curiosity, but do you have a favorite or some favorite words in any language? Could be because of how it sounds, the meaning, etc. So there are words I particularly like Turkish words in Macedonian and how they change meaning. I find that quite interesting. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So in Macedonian we have the word junjule, and junjule is it's a type of flower. It's in English it's a marigold, and in Macedonian, it means marigold as well, but it also has a slang meaning, and it means a rug rat. So you use it as kind of, naughty, or sort of quite well, not naughty so much as, yeah, kind of naughty, but yeah, sort of kids that you can't control, that are sort of a bit playful, a bit energetic, a bit all over the place, and they're running around. And so you call them rug rat in English, I think, is the best. It's a very feels quite American English, but yeah, rugrat's probably the best translation I think for that word. And I quite like any Turkish words from in Macedonian. I love because I don't know, like sometimes how they change meaning. So so a word that might be similar, I don't think it's actually, I don't even know it's from Turkish, but for example, a word like başka. Başka in Turkish is like one more, another one. Başka bir çay lütfen, one more tea please. And in Macedonian, başka means separately. So if you want to pay separately, you say sakameda platim başka. Oddelno would be the Slavic way of saying it, oddelno, which you can understand if you speak another Slavic language, because oddelno. But we would often say bashka. And then the interesting thing is bashk in Albanian is the kind of with together. So bashk punoim is collaboration, like we collaborate, we literally work together, bashk punoim. And it's used sabashku, together, in Albanian. These kinds of things I find fascinating, that a word can be sort of very similar but different across languages. I love that kind of stuff. And favorite words, I'm not sure if I have many favorite words. People ask me about sort of Drainog. Drainog is, I always say, is one of my favorite words in Welsh, which means hedgehog. I think it's quite cute, but I think it's also because there was a famous song, Drainog Marw ar y Ffordd, which means the dead hedgehog on the road, which is a very popular song in Welsh in the 80s. Actually, a bit before my time, but I thought it was quite funny. When I heard the word Drainog, I thought it was quite a nice word. Just more out of curiosity, okay, favorite, cute, let me see. About words, how do you recommend approaching academic words? Because you most likely never going to learn the terminology no matter what CF or LASL unless you go into them directly. Erasmus, so some words, for example, you may never need. I mean, I'm not big on learning every single word just because it's there. I think that I'm a more practical learner, and I know that the sort of there are people out there who want to just focus and learn every single word possible in a language, and I think that's, again, an endeavor that I find fruitful in and of its own, in its own right. For me personally, um, I'm happy to sort of just go along my road and my journey and learn things in a more organic way, unless it's something I'm particularly interested in, and then I may try and figure it out. There was a word, for example, I wanted to learn the word for. So we have. I'm trying to think what the word is in English now. Hang on, just a second, because I don't think in language normally. I only think when I'm saying things. So sometimes, what was the word? It was. Oh my word. So not passive, not aggressive, it's assertive. That's it. So assertiveness training is something that we get in school all the way throughout school in the UK, and I believe in other English speaking countries. And so assertive is not just a word, but it's a concept that's kind of in our heads. And I was trying to explain it once years ago to people here in the Balkans. But assertive as a word exists, for example, it exists in Macedonian. I can say assertiven sum. I am assertive. But on and I can say assertiveness, but that word exists in language, but people don't use it or understand it fully. So if ever you talk about it, you have to explain the word to people. So depending on the person you're talking to, and depending on the topic, you could learn all of this very technical vocabulary, but you may never get to use it. There are lots of words I know in Macedonian that if I use them, people don't understand them. I went on this whole, I think I've talked about this before, but I went on this whole thing where I know all the different birds in English and French and etc. And I wanted to know the different birds in Macedonian because I thought it was important. So I learned words like magpie, strachka. I learned words like wren, orevche. I learned words like, I'm trying to think, blackbird, kos. I learned words like, I don't know. There is so many of them. I mean, as well as the normal everyday words that people would know, right? Um, but then when I learned them, I realized very quickly that no one knew them. Very few people would know any of the ones that I'd learned. And so they were completely useless. So I tend to now go with a more, I'll learn them as I go approach. Unless I'm really, really into something, like maybe I was with birds. Yeah. I want to do traditional study for Burmese when my Russian is intermediate, but I'm used to a comprehensible input. Is there a way to do traditional study books where I can make it somewhat comprehensible? Oof, it's a very good question. Those languages. Um, mm, a language like Burmese, thinking when you see you make it comprehensible, I think possibly it's knowing which sources to be able to find, and sometimes for that it's really good to sort of make contact with somebody who speaks the language, so they can sort of give you an introduction to things. I think probably topics that interest you might be a good way because then you're going to be learning vocabulary that's particularly interesting to you, and you're going to have more patience with getting through it, and then you'll see other vocabulary and it'll start linking together. Um, but I think talking to speakers of the language is a really important way of doing it, particularly for languages like Burmese, where it might not be obvious where to go for materials. There's somebody in our language community actually called Andre Muller. And Andre Muller, he studied Burmese and Thai and a few other languages. Also, Studio Raj would probably have some ideas as well. Um, I don't know how much Studio's gone into Burmese, but I know Andre Muller, for example, he actually went and spent time in the country, so he's used it and spoken it. And there are a number of Burmese people actually in the language learning community that reach out from time to time. So yeah, I mean that would be my first point of call, I think. For example, I don't know Icelandic, but I'm thinking of going for an exchange in 18 months. But it will be for an exchange for maths program, so I need to learn the maths terminology in Icelandic. Oh, okay. Do you know what? I think that for that kind of thing, to I'd be tempted to actually find out, get some maths books and maybe meet some Icelandic people who might be able to help you to get into that kind of vocabulary. I think that would be a good way forward. I know in the book I have a book called Vocabulaire Islandais. It's a French, sort of say, it's a French book, and it has some quite like vocabulary on maths, basic stuff. But then to move forward, then I think possibly you want to make some connections to get into, maybe meet people who are into maths or in the maths department at the university to be able to see if you can get some translations or some help with understanding the text in Icelandic. I think that would be a good way forward, Erasmus, actually. So often the universities can help to put you in touch, especially in a country like Iceland. People are very friendly and very, very kind, and I'm sure they'd have things that they could send or show you to be able to improve your vocabulary in that area. Yeah, you're very welcome. Love languages, loves languages, and yeah, I mean, yeah. Sometimes partner learning with a partner can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can work really well. Sometimes it can be a nightmare. I've met people who have had varying experiences of speaking language with a partner. I'm just going to see if I've got any questions here on. Here we go. How much contact should you have with a language in which you have reached a B2 in order to keep improving and reach a C1 level while also learning new languages? Wow. The answer to that question really depends on the languages involved. I hate to sort of give you a very vague answer, but it really does. It's very specific. Um, and and so it's not necessarily easy to say how much time exactly. Um, it's kind of like this: how long is a piece of string? You know, how it depends on how long the string is. We don't know. Um, it depends how often you're reading and coming into or reading and listening to the language. First of all, because if you're listening and reading the language a lot, then it can happen more quickly. Um, if you are only doing it sort of once a week or something, then obviously it's going to take a lot more time to get to that kind of level. I mean, this whole idea of the C1 level or B2 level or whatever level you're talking about, there's quite a lot of gray area in between the boundaries. And this is why I say it can sometimes feel a little bit like imposter syndrome when we talk about putting a label on our level in the language. And it's why for many people who speak languages, it can be quite difficult to quantify exactly how well they speak it. And even the exams, you can do the exams, for example, and then you can be surprised by the outcome. I know I've spoken to people who have sat exams even at C2 level, and when they spoke to me in the language, I was taken aback by some things they didn't know, or how they were not as able to express themselves as fluently or as fluidly as I expected they would at C2. That doesn't diminish or mean that they don't speak the language to that level. Of course, they've just passed the exam. It's not for me to make any judgment like that. At the same time, um, it shows you that perceptions are very subjective. And so, what one person thinks is important to know, and what another person thinks is important to know, to say that you've just crossed that bridge over to the next level, can be quite different. So it can take a while to sort of really feel that you've changed a gear in your language learning. You've sort of moved gears into, and you're going a lot faster. Um, Okay, so if you want to ask a question on Instagram and I haven't answered, please do feel free to use the question uh, um, box at the bottom, because otherwise I have a lot of notifications on Instagram of people joining and waving to people and just hellos. So I often can't see all of the questions. I just got one in there for now, but I'm sure there are going to be other questions I haven't seen, and I am sorry if I missed a question, but it's just a massive of who joined and when. Unfortunately, it's a very, very long list. Greetings from Russia. It's an honor to see you live on YouTube. Thank you, Alexei. That's very kind of you. Thanks for joining. Is your daughter still learning Korean? How is it going for her to learn it now? Do you still learn together? So we never actually learnt Korean together necessarily. And when we started, well, she was interested in Korean and asked me if I'd be interested in learning it as well. But what we agreed very, very, very quickly was we had very different schedules in terms of when we could study and what we could do. So we agreed that we wouldn't do it together, and sort of, and I said to her, look, you do have a lot of other things to do, so see what you want to do. And so I've just kind of left her to it. We don't really talk. We haven't really talked about Korean for a while. I don't think she's going like full pelt to learn it really quickly or anything like that. And I definitely am not doing that either. It's more a case of gaining familiarity with the language. So I mean, my Korean now is not even an A1 level. After months and months and months of study, it's still not an A1 level. So it would probably be a 1.1, maybe. It's it's a very basic level. I understand and can recognize more than I can say, which is very often the case with languages. But yeah, I still don't. I still don't speak it very well. Can you explain the difference between C1 and C2 level? I've been told by native speakers that I speak Spanish at C2, but I don't think so. I think I speak it at C1 level, but maybe it's because I don't understand them and the difference between both levels. It's a good question, actually, the difference between C2 and C1. I mean, there's some kind of concrete text that people, well, the levels are described as. I mean, I could read those out, obviously, but from my understanding of the way people talk about C1 and C2, C1 would be, I mean, I know in Germany and in Austria, in German-speaking countries now, quite often they will look for a C1 level to perform certain jobs or certain studies, for example. Whereas in other countries, it might just be a B1 or a B2 that you need to do that. My understanding is really at a C2 level, you're kind of you've covered pretty much most of the things that you would come across, even some quite technical stuff at a C2 level. I mean, there are people who speak a language as their one and only language who would not pass a C2 exam. Just to kind of put that out there as it's factually so. I mean, there are people who would struggle to pass a C2 exam in their one and only language. I don't necessarily see the C2 exam per se as a prerequisite for many things. It's kind of a nice thing to be able to do. And obviously it's kind of this showing a higher level, right, in the language. When people talk about sort of just if they haven't done these exams and they just say, oh, I think you're at this level or that level, or I get this very often on, I made a video years ago when I passed my A2 exam in Turkish. And if you look at the comments on that video, it's, oh no, you're at least a B1 or a B2 even. And no, I've literally just finished my A2 exam and I have not studied anything from any other level. And that's all I know is that A2 level. I may have known that A2 level very well, but it's funny how people will come back and sort of add to, sometimes I'll take away from what you do, but more often than not, I find that people add and expect that you know more than you do. That's kind of my perception. And I think that comes from the fact that we talk about ourselves having this imposter syndrome and the Dunning-Kruger effect. But that works both ways round, right? So when you've got somebody who's talking to you, they also have these issues going on as well. And so when you come together, they might hear you speaking, and you might have a similar level to them, but they hear you and they think you're amazing because maybe your accent sounds more authentic, or your pronunciation's a bit more precise, or you know a certain word or a certain phrase. You can use grammar and the grammar at that level better than they can. It could be any number of things, right? But they perceive you then as better, so they say, "Oh no, well I'm an A2, so you must be a B1 because you're way better than me, or a B2." Um, and I think that happens quite a lot, which is I find quite interesting. But yeah, that happens quite a lot. There isn't even a C2 exam for some languages like Estonian. Being one, no, there aren't. Some languages don't have a C2 exam. Åh nej, missade att du skulle ha live nu. Ja, men du kan titta på det så, och nästa vecka så kan vi ses. Ja, men det är bra att det har kommit. Ja, tack. Korean alphabet is easy to learn, but what I found really difficult was the vocabulary, and the words seem so exotic. Of course, a lot of Anglicisms in Korean, but those were usually the ones easy to remember. Exactly, Erasmus. Also, what I find a bit tricky in Korean, yes, it's easy to learn the alphabet, but actually reading it and making sure that you put the pairs of consonants together to change the sounds and the pronunciation, sometimes that can be a bit tricky. So sometimes you get consonants that when they're one goes from one block to the other and it moves over, and then sometimes it makes it a double or a hard sound. That can be a bit tricky to get the hang of, I think, in Korean. So I don't find Korean writing as simple as everyone says. I think there's more to it than everyone says. But generally speaking, yes, compared to other languages that I've studied, absolutely agree. Yeah, for Dutch, I don't think there was a C2 exam either. They still have the NT2, NT2 NT2 or zoiets. So NT2 exam, but I think the NT2 is actually more equivalent to a C1. But as I say, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a need for a C2 exam. Maybe I've missed it, but I don't know if I have. I don't even know the purpose of it really, but it's there and it's fun to do if you do it. So yeah. How do you take these exams? So some of the exams you would be able to just do at the depends on the language, of course, but you would normally do them at the local institutes. So so I did the Turkish exams at the Yunus Emre Institute in Skopje. My daughter sat when she was 10. She sat the French, Spanish, and German exams for children. Obviously, the highest level she could take, and she did those. Yeah, at the Alliance Française. No, was it the Alliance Française? No, Institut Français. So you can either do the Alliance Française or the Institut Français. And then she did Cervantes as well, and the other one was at Goethe Institute. So Goethe, and so she did the official language institutes for those languages. So she did all those when she was 10. I did my Turkish ones up to B1, but that was now it's many years ago. But each one has different places where you can do them. Some of them, as Rasmus quite rightly said, they just have like sort of their own exams that are equivalent of in those countries. So when I was in Czech Republic, for example, we just did the exam at the university. So I went to Charles University and I sat the advanced Czech studies exam at the end of my year of study at the university. And that exam allowed me to then go and study at university in Czech Republic for whatever I wanted to do. I've heard since then that exam is equivalent to C1 now. But back then we didn't have these levels. And I sat that exam in 2004. So just as Czech Republic joined the European Union. So those levels didn't exist. But then when I went back to Czech Republic, I'd not used it very often, and I've been focusing on other Slavic languages. And then I joined a B2 group to practice speaking, because B2 is actually quite a good level to just have general conversation on various topics. So yeah, just to give you an idea. Memorizing the common words and phrases, your thoughts. I mean, you need to be able to have these kinds of things at your fingertips to be able to get by in language. It takes time. I mean, for example, um, like a sentence in Irish, right, that I saw months ago now. Tá sé go deas bulalat. It means it's good to see you. It's great to see you, right? To meet you. Sorry, to meet you. Bulalat. Um, I read it. I forgot it. I came across it again and again and again and again. I forgot it. I forgot it. I forgot it. But now with Irish, I've got to a point where I understand the elements of that, and so now I find it easier to remember. I may have said it a little bit wrong, but people would understand what I'm saying if I said that to an Irish speaker. And these kinds of things are things that you can say you can learn off by heart. The issue is that when people learn just off by heart the very basic things, that's one of the reasons why sometimes when you learn a language, you may miss some of these out if you're not learning it all just parrot fashion. It can give the impression that you're like a polyparrot, and it feels a bit discombobulated, but a bit disjointed, when you're sort of talking. But it is absolutely important that you know these words and just recognize that you will need constant repetition and exposure to these words and to this vocabulary to make it stick. I know I do. Richard, do you accept live requests? Not normally, no. I'm happy to do lives with other people. So if you want to if you have a topic or you want to do something, I'm very happy to accept that. But I don't tend to for these, because this is a live to talk about language learning, to share some thoughts and experiences, and then to answer general questions. So it doesn't really work as a live with somebody else. I prefer those to be things that we do as a collaboration that we can set up and then do. So I've done many of those in different languages, but I don't tend to do it on my lives on a Sunday. This is reserved solely for this kind of conversation. Let me see. Okay, let's make sure I've got the rest of the questions. I've got like 3 minutes, and then I need to hop off. What do you suggest to get over the fear of speaking a new language? Swallowing your fear. Unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to just say, oh, just do this. I know it sounds very simple for me to say, just do it. Unfortunately, that is the only thing you can do. If you want to get over a fear of anything, you have to do it, because you're talking about normalizing something that gives you anxiety, and doing it in pieces, in maybe an environment that's safe for you, with friends, with people, trusted people, with a teacher, in a safe environment first, and build up your confidence that way, I would say, would probably be the best way to do it. But it all comes down to you have to do it, and setting yourself small goals, to doing it, baby steps. You don't need to just jump in and freak yourself out and then scare yourself off from doing it again. Baby steps, particularly with people you trust. Talking of exams, it's kind of surprising that Icelandic doesn't have an official language exam. So Icelandic has, you can do a year of Icelandic studies and get an exam from that. You also get an exam from the course that I did so we did an exam at the end of our course, and we were assessed for our knowledge of Icelandic. So I was in they streamed the groups, so we were in different levels on the course. And then at the end of the month of intensive study, we got a certificate and university credits. In fact, I got university credits from the University of Iceland for Icelandic. And that was, yeah, different. I think they gave different levels to the different groups. I think mine was, I want to say I want to say they assessed us at a B1, and I've got a feeling that I didn't agree. I thought that actually I was more like, sorry, B2. I think they put down, and I thought I was more of a B1 level at that time. So yeah, it was, but yeah, I got something like that. They don't have like the A1, A2, B1, B2 levels like this. I don't know. I don't know how, because it's quite a lot to set those kinds of things up, and I don't know how much they need it, because in their society they know they've got their own courses and their own things that they do. A lot of people learn Icelandic though, strange. Compared to other languages that have more speakers, quite a lot of people learn Icelandic. The content I want to learn is not available in my target language. It has subtitles in Spanish, but I don't know which dialect. Can I study the subtitles? I want to learn is not available in my target language. It has subtitles in Spanish, but I don't know which dialect. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, J.A. Sorry. Are you trying to learn Spanish, or are you trying to learn another language through Spanish? I'm not quite clear. In België, tenminste 5 jaar geleden, was er geen C2-examen. Nee, eigenlijk niet. Er was wel een resultaat als Nederlands voor anderstaligen, maar je kunt niet hoger behalen dan dan een C1. Ja, C1, dat was het eigenlijk. Dat is NT2 in Nederland. NT2-examen. Yeah. It's been 2 years and I still have to go back to Korean words because I forgot to carry the bachim. Yeah, exactly. First time. And still, yeah, forget the pastization. Absolutely. They're a nightmare in Korean. I'm so glad that you have the same problems, because it makes me feel, I mean, I know it's common, but it's nice. Thank you for admitting that, because it's, I don't, I get that people say it's easy to read and write Korean, but and I get I think they mean to learn the basic vocabulary, like to learn the basic alphabet, but actually it's not that straightforward. So I'm so glad somebody else said that, it wasn't just me. But yeah, I know other people do have that experience, because I study Korean with other people, and they say the same thing too. So thank you for admitting that as well. I appreciate it. Out of curiosity, did you try the Laoshu 55,000 FLR method? No, I didn't, Tim. So I didn't, because I don't think it was really aimed at me. I don't think I was the audience. And so he came out with that method, and we were already friends from the the language forums. But yeah, I don't think I was his target audience. And if I tried to do every single course, I'd probably go out of my mind. No, I was always intrigued by what he did, but he talked to me about it. So I mean, I felt like I had a good handle on what it was about, but I didn't try it myself, as in like buy the product and try it. But I had a fairly good idea. The content I want to learn is not available in total language. Okay, Irish has so much fluffy language and idioms. It does. One way our Irish teacher taught us was to say suicide was Curian Alama, bus, which literally means put one's hands in depth. Oh wow, it's beautiful but difficult. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My word. Yeah, Irish is really quite involved. I'm finding that now myself. Let me see. Okay, unfortunately, I will have to disappear in a second. Mm, 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 mm. Is reading and listening a good way to improve? Absolutely, yeah, absolutely a good way to improve. So, I mean, the more contact you have with the language, the more improve, the sort of more improvement in your level you're going to see. I think that's really important. So, yeah, languages don't go into your brain by osmosis. They need comprehensible input. They need things that you can understand and hear, and um, they need to become so normal for you that they're automatic. And that's what the words and the vocabulary and the grammar and goes for everything to do with language. I mean, that's basically what your aim should be, was that as much um, contact with the language as possible. And on that note, I will wish you a very happy week and good luck with your language learning. And I will see you again next Sunday. Hopefully, both platforms will work. I've got a feeling that Instagram's been playing up because Facebook went funny with me doing two streams at once. But hopefully, I will see you both on both platforms next week. Thank you very much for keeping me company today, and yeah, next week I want to talk about something a bit specific, actually, or at least I want to sort of drop this idea in your head right now, and that is I'm thinking of doing some tutoring. So I'm thinking of I've been doing tutoring for a friend's son for the past few months, and I've actually really enjoyed doing it, and I'm thinking of doing that kind of thing. Um, but I'm wondering how I do it in terms of what kind of format. I believe that it's quite an individual process, so I may well have a think and see if you've got any ideas or any thoughts about what you would like to see or what you think is right for me to do. Then yeah, I'm happy to hear them. But I do have some thoughts of my own, and I will be announcing something soon, hopefully. Okay. Take care and see you next week. Bye, everyone.